Please use the self-service elevators for your trip to the Rocket Jet flight deck.
I'll run you through. Watch this, Wendy.
Our library is well stocked with priceless first editions. Only ghost stories, of course.
And now, the Magic Kingdom proudly presents In a Million Points of Musical Light,
WDW Radio, your information station. Hello and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show number 418 for the week of September 6th, 2015. I'm here to help you have the best possible Disney vacation experience and bring you a little bit of Disney magic wherever you are with this podcast, videos, blog, live broadcasts every Wednesday, special events, my books, audio tours, and more. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes and find everything else at wdwradio.com. On September 14th and 15th, PBS is going to air Walt Disney: An American Experience, a two-part, 4-hour biography that's going to offer an unprecedented look at the life and legacy of one of America's most enduring and influential storytellers and business leaders, featuring rare archival footage from the Disney vaults, scenes from some of the greatest films, interviews with biographers, historians, animators, and artists. It's really going to tell stories about not just his triumphs, but challenges along the way. And this week, I had a chance to sit down with the director and executive producer for a short interview, and then I'm going to share audio from a panel featuring the two that I moderated during a special live screening and preview. I'll then have the answer to our last Walt Disney World trivia question of the week and pose a new challenge for your chance to win a Disney Prize package. Then stay tuned to the end of the show as I'll have information about our upcoming Meets of the Month, including September's, as well as other events in Walt Disney World and on the road. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. Before we get into the interview and segment this week, I want to quickly apologize for the quality of the audio, especially from the panel discussion at the theater. That did come directly from the theater, not as clean and as crisp as I would have liked it to have been. I tried to clean it up best that I can, would ask for your patience and understanding as you listen to it, but hope you enjoy the interview and the panel. Let's go.
Gala event, unusual even for Hollywood. The world premiere of Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Rarely has Hollywood been so agog over the opening of a motion picture. The town's been talking about it for months. Practically the entire movie colony will be at the opening tonight, and you're going along too, as we take you to the Carthay Circle Theater for the premiere of Walt Disney's full-length Technicolor production, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We take you now to the Carthay Circle Theater.
On September 14th and the 15th, PBS will be airing an unprecedented documentary covering the life of Walt Disney, the man, not the brand. And I'm fortunate today to be sitting with the executive producer, Mark Samuels, and managing director of the American Experience, Jim Dunford. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure meeting you today. We're here at lunch at the Citrus Club, getting ready for a sort of pre-screening and panel discussion tonight in Winter Garden. So thank you guys for joining me today.
Thanks, Lou. Thank you. Great to be here.
So I'm smiling because we're talking about a 4-hour documentary that probably could have been 8 hours and still not cover everything. And having a limited time to be able to talk to you is a challenge in and of itself. Because that's the thing. When you cover a topic like Walt Disney, there is so much about just the person. You said the documentary ends at the time of his passing in 1966, but there is so much. Tell me first, how does a project like this even get started?
Well, we're a history series. We're the longest-running history series on public television. This is our 27th season. So we do a range of subjects from biographies to stories of events. And Walt Disney's place in American history is undisputed. He's a natural subject for us because, frankly, he transcends not only cultural history, but he extends into economic history, business history. He has influenced so many aspects of American culture that his importance is unquestioned. It was just a question all along of could we do it, and I think that was one reason we haven't done it till recently, and I'm really glad that we have done it now that we've done it.
And I think as a Disney enthusiast, I speak for a lot of people who for many years have been waiting for a Walt Disney biography. And I think part of the challenge is, well, who is best equipped to do it, right? And the nice thing about it coming from PBS is that you artists are going to present it from a PBS, point of view. Because when you do read books about Walt Disney, and there's many, whether it's the Gable book or Bob Thomas, every author has its own unique spin, and everybody sort of tells their stories their own unique ways. Tell us about the process of putting it together, because you had the cooperation not just of the Disney company and the people that worked for and with and around Walt, but the Disney family as well.
Right. Well, the key thing for us, Lou, is that we have complete editorial integrity on our series. We've done 16 biographies of American presidents. We've tried to find the real story at the center of those people. And, politics is incredibly polarized, and there are lovers and haters of presidents. And we have attempted to try to find not the middle ground, but the place where there's agreement about a person's role, responsibilities, motivations, what really made them click. So when we do our biographies, we really take the time to do the research, we look at the naysayers, we look at the fanatical fans, and we try to find, who was the real subject here? In this case, the interesting thing is that you not only have a remarkably influential person, you have an enormous body of work that this person created. And we had desires early on to go into that work and to explore it and to learn about it. And so that we basically, after getting started on the project, decided to expand it. And you're right, it could have been longer, but thank goodness we did expand it so that we could not only deal with the biography of Walt Disney's life, but also deal with the work that he created during his lifetime.
I think the interesting thing, too, is that, I think a lot of the inspiration from Walt Disney doesn't necessarily come from his accomplishments. It comes from the challenges. It comes from the dark times. It comes from looking at how he handled, the naysayers who called it Disney's folly or the strike or the wartime. Tell us how you addressed and how important it was to address not just all the positive things, but some of the challenges that Walt and his family and his company encountered.
I think one of the things about him is that we started to really realize that, he was such a creative person, but as the company grew, he moved further and further away from that. And I think that for him was a challenge, but what it made him do is sort of continually sort of reinvent himself. So he went from, Mickey Mouse shorts to full-length animated film to television to then, the theme parks and the opening of Disneyland before he passed away and Disney World after. But I think that at each point there were these moments in his life, that really started with his childhood that you could see him wanting to sort of play through, if you will, and make the challenges part of what he fed back into his art.
And do you think, there's so many of us that, try and consume all the content that we can to learn all that we can about Walt, positive, negative, from wherever it comes. Do you think that in the years that it took to put this together and the interviews and going through the archives, do you think that there's still going to be things here that people are going to learn or be surprised about Walt?
One of the things that Sarah Colt, who was our filmmaker on the project, was able to do is, she was able to talk to the scholars who had spent time. You mentioned Neil Gabler earlier and a few others, but she was also able to talk to some of the people who knew Walt and who worked with Walt. And, as time goes on, that group gets obviously smaller and smaller. So I think that when you start to hear the stories about, what it was like to work for Walt, and for many people, they come into the story when he was Uncle Walt. But in actuality, Uncle Walt was an artist in his 20s, 30s, and 40s who was, a pretty demanding boss. And we're able to hear from the people who talk about that. So I think that is definitely going to be surprising to people. And then also just to step back and think about, we all have a 2015 idea of what Disney is. to step back and think, even in 1966 when he died, something like 240 million people interacted with Disney in some way or another, whether it was through the television series, whether it was through the theme park. So I think there are surprises along the whole journey.
I think it's interesting that you bring up about Walt, the boss, right? Very different than the Uncle Walt that's on TV. I know Dick Sherman tells a story about, when Walt was coming down the halls, everybody sort of got nervous. Everybody sort of stopped. And I think that, you hear stories about people like Walt Disney or Steve Jobs the same way. Very different persona than you might see on stage. But I think what you hear and you can see in the eyes of a Floyd Norman or Dick Sherman or whoever it may be, or Rolly Crump, when they talk about Walt, the reverence and the respect for they have, because they knew that what Walt was doing was pulling the best that they could out of the creatives around him.
I mean, Richard Sherman has a great quote at the beginning of the film where, you didn't tell Walt you had a good idea. He would correct you and say, you have an idea. We'll tell you if it's good or not. And I think that summed up Walt as a boss.
Yeah, I think also that they recognized that what Walt Disney was trying to achieve either hadn't been done before or hadn't been done as well as he was trying to make it done. And that they were part of an enterprise that was dedicated towards really striving and reaching. So I think that drew them towards it. I think, the way that Walt drove himself, for some people, was very, very hard to be around. And, I think we all recognize that kind of achievement comes at a cost, comes at a personal cost, and it comes at a cost of those around him. And that's part of Walt's story as well.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of days on the 14th and the 15th, and I'm thrilled that it's not a half-hour documentary, it's not a 1-hour documentary, because and I speak from a fan perspective, that 4 hours is still not going to be enough. But we, on behalf of the people that have such a respect and admiration for Walt, not just as a business person, but as a creative, as a husband and a father, right, who found that family was still, you never neglect your family for business. I know we're very excited about it. So it's going to air September 14th and 15th. Set your DVRs on PBS stations around the country. Excellent. I look forward to the screening later on this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Want to know a secret? Promise not to tell. We are standing by a wishing well.
So, my father was my hero, but there was one other man, a man that I never met, that had an incredibly profound impact on my life. A man I admired and I aspired to be like, a man I never met before, but who literally changed my life forever. And that man, of course, is Walt Disney. So I am incredibly honored and grateful and feel it's a privilege to be up here discussing this groundbreaking documentary and to introduce two of the men that put this together. Mark Samuels was named executive producer of American Experience, PBS's flagship history series in 2003. Under his leadership, the series has been honored with nearly every industry award, including, get comfortable, the Peabody Primetime Emmys, the DuPont Columbia Journalism Award, the Writers Guild Award, let me sit down, Oscar nominations, the Sundance Film Festival audience, and that's it? The grand, okay. So prior to touring WGBF, he worked as an independent documentary filmmaker and executive producer for several U.S. public television stations and as a producer for the first co-production between Japanese and American television. A native of Wisconsin, he is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please welcome Mark Samuels.
Thank you.
To his left, Jim Dunford is the managing director for the American Experience. He is responsible for directing the series strategies and communications, audience development, post-production, and digital elements. He also collaborates with the editorial team on content development and strategic planning. He first joined the American Experience staff back in 2000, holding several roles, including series manager. He spent more than 25 years in public media, most recently serving as the director of board relations for WGBH in Boston. He is a graduate of Boston College. He was also on the adjunct faculty at the college, teaching courses in media writing and programming for over 20 years. He's won many media awards, including a New England Emmy, and served in several Telly Awards. He also served as quarterback of the New England Patriots. No, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It ended right there.
Like, wait, where did that come from?
Please give it a round for Jim Dunford.
So this is exciting. This is the second time I've had a chance to see these, and the thing that I was worried is that the 4-hour series isn't going to be long enough, and the time that we have to chat isn't going to be long enough. We're going to have time for questions from the audience as well. So please start thinking of things as we go along. But I think one of the questions that probably a lot of people would think is in the years of research that go into putting a documentary like this together. Was there anything that you found that surprised you, not about Walt the brand or Walt the business, but really about Walt the man?
Thanks, Lou. First of all, I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. It's a real honor for us to bring this film to one of the real epicenters of the Walt Disney story here in Central Florida, and to be with WCF and Polly. And it's just a real pleasure for us to come down from Boston and share this with you. We're really excited about this film. We've been working on it for 3 years. It's really unprecedented. I would say that one of the biggest surprises that I had as we were working on the film, and Sarah Colt, who's the producer of the film, and I were talking about it, was, there's many people in this room, I'm sure, that know an awful lot about Walt Disney, but I just knew Walt Disney from the guy who was in the living room on Sunday night when I was a kid, and I'd go in with my sisters and watch him on TV, and he was on top of the world when I saw him. He had the theme park, he had the TV shows, he had the movies, and it just looked all so effortless. He was Uncle Walt, and he was so assured. I just thought, wow, someone's had a charmed life. Someone's actually gotten to the top so easily. And what you really find out is that Walt Disney struggled and clawed his way and persevered against great obstacles within his family, within his corporation, within the industry. And he fought. He had a vision and a passion. He wasn't a saint, but he was someone who was totally dedicated to what he wanted to do. And he brought on a whole lot of people, and he created the most remarkable body of work in American cultural history.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the documentary is going to really humanize the man and all of his flaws and faults that we all have. But why now, and why choose Walt Disney for the American experience, where you've done so many presidential documentaries and things like that in the past?
So just a brief introduction, and Jim can jump here anytime. Sure. American Experience is in its 27th season. We're the longest running history series on television, the most watched on television. We've done some 300 films about American history, biographies, events, and we've done 16 presidential biographies over that time. And they're pretty definitive pieces, 4 hours usually. And so when we first conceived this film, we thought, who is more important in American cultural history in the 20th century in particular than Walt Disney? We had just done a film about Henry Ford, who we felt really laid claim to being one of the pivotal figures in the 20th century, introduced mobility and the industrial process and all that. Well, his counterpart in many ways in culture is Walt Disney. Huge impact. And so we felt there was a natural subject for us, and that we should give him, in a way, the presidential treatment because of that.
And so in terms of, we talk about humanizing Walt, what kind of differences will we see between Walt, the man, the father, the husband, and Walt, sort of the myth?
Sure. I think one of the things that's interesting is the project started out and it was going to be a 2-hour biography of Walt Disney. And then through the access we were able to get to the Disney Archive, we really realized that to understand the man, you really needed to sort of start to understand the work. And when you think about the body of work that he was responsible for, Snow White, which we saw the clip from, was the first of what they call the Big Five in Disney, which is Snow White, Pinocchio, Dumbo, Bambi, and Fantasia, and those were done in a period of about 6 years. So I think it became really evident that we needed to be able to tell both the story of the man, but also, the work. And for me, when you ask about surprises, he was never satisfied. I think, Mickey Mouse shorts became, the full-length feature of Snow White, became, the Big Five, became live action, became nature documentaries, became theme parks. He just was constantly pushing forward to the next thing and not sitting back and saying, like, okay, now, I've cracked that nut. I don't need to do anything else. And I think that really was what sort of, drives the narrative of the story.
Yeah, and when you undertake a project like this, obviously one that can't be told in a half hour, an hour or two, or probably couldn't even be told in 4 hours. I'm sure you could have gone on longer. It was interesting for me to see through the clips that we saw that you didn't just get access to information, but you have stories from Dick Sherman and Floyd. And also, but how important was it, and how did you work not just with the people that knew and worked for and with Walt, but the Walt's family, and more importantly, the Disney company itself, because in order to tell the story, you have to have the access.
Sure. I mean, I think that, one of the things that Sarah Cope, the filmmaker, was able to do is she brings together a collection of voices. A lot of you saw in the clips tonight. Both scholars who spent a lot of time, Neil Gabler, and spent 10 years writing his biography of Walt Disney. So we have people like Neil, we have people like Carmenita Higginbotham, who's an art historian from the University of Virginia. She teaches a course on Disney. And to your point, we also have lots of people who worked with Walt. Richard Sherman being one of the voices in the film that I love listening to his stories. But then there is that point where you have to kind of take that all together and create something. And the family always, even when we do presidential biographies, the role of the family is always sort of an interesting one. Because in many ways, they're not going to necessarily give you great insight. They're going to give you the message from the family. Sarah was able to spend some serious time, 3 or 4 hours at the Disney Family Museum with Diane, his daughter, before she unfortunately passed away. I think she would have been interviewed for the film otherwise. His son-in-law, Ron Miller, is in the film. But I think it's important it's that range. It's the scholars, it's the eyewitnesses, it's the people who worked with him.
But as public media journalists, how do you ensure that you retain that objectivity that you need?
Well, it's not only objectivity, it's editorial integrity. And I say that the thing that I said we've been around, well, maybe I didn't say, we've been around for 27 years, we're the longest running. So we've been around a long time, and a couple of people have said to me that, a good question, what took you so long to make something about Walt Disney? It's a fair question. And one of the things that took us so long was that the Disney Corporation, because Walt Disney is their namesake, is their brand, has been very controlling about everything to do with Walt Disney. Early on, when I was looking into this project, someone told me that there are approximately 8,000 images of Walt Disney, and 7,800 plus are held by the Disney Archives in Burbank. There's very little out there. There's the motion pictures and all this material that you see, and certainly we all know that you can't use any of the films or any of the TV shows without Disney's permission. And rightly so, the Disney Corporation keeps those close, very close. And they were very famous for not releasing that to third parties. And so I went out 3 years ago and started a series of conversations with the Disney Corporation about possibility of making a film. I fully expected that we would not be allowed to do it. And in the end, we were given unprecedented access that didn't rely upon any editorial involvement from the Disney Corporation. They have not seen any of it. No one we have not provided any bit of the film to Disney. They're going to see it on September 14th, when you see it, the entire thing. And that was the arrangement and the agreement from the beginning. And that was essential to us. And I think it was only because, frankly, Lou, of our track record with doing 16 presidential biographies, that I gave several of them to the Disney people I was talking with. They watched them. They felt that they were fair, and they were on some polarizing figures, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and because of the integrity of public television, PBS, and that integrity begins at stations like WCF here in Florida. And we weren't going to do a drive-by, quickie biography of Walt. We were going to put in the time. We spent 2 years making it. We weren't going to do it in a half an hour. We weren't going to do it in an hour. I'm sure in the 4 hours, there's going to be people that look at it and go, how could they possibly have left out that? And, my goodness.
Do you have Mark's email?
There's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, so you get 4 hours. But I'm telling you, when I told PBS that we were doing 4 hours on Walt Disney, he said, 4 hours? He's not a president. I said, well, he's awfully important. So trust me on that.
Well, speaking of important, Walt and Mickey, as Bob was saying, they're synonymous, and really they would describe. And interestingly enough, Mickey was really born out of some of the darkest times in Walt's career. Again, a lot of things that people don't necessarily know about. But he is described by a number of people as Walt's alter ego. Do you think, in your research, do you think that Mickey was a way to sort of humanize, to be able to humanize Walt, or maybe a way for Walt to cope with his own personal demons and feelings?
I mean, I think one of the things that comes out in the film, and even in the clip we shared earlier tonight, is Mickey absolutely was in many ways that. Walt had a tough childhood. He absolutely had a tough childhood. He became incredibly family-oriented by, he was a good father to his two daughters, and I think that Mickey was, in many ways, he wanted people to have fun. He wanted people to enjoy things, and I think Mickey became the personification of that. I mean, it's interesting, one of the taglines, the branding taglines that Disney uses is "It all started with a mouse," and I think in many ways it did. What was interesting is a few weeks ago, I think some of you in the audience may have been at D23, the Disney fan convention. Oswald, which is the precursor to Mickey, Oswald's now making a comeback, so I saw lots of Oswald t-shirts and things like that. But I do think Mickey became, as Gabler says in the film, Walt's alter ego.
Yeah, I just love the fact that we got Oswald back in a trade for a sports broadcaster. So, one thing that's interesting too is we saw a little bit in the clips was that Disney and his studios really started to take hold and be successful and really thrive actually during the Depression. Mm-hmm. Is it at this point that Walt becomes the American icon? And do you think that in some ways what Walt was doing and the films and even the products he was making sort of almost helped America get through this tough time?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we always look for in a subject is the relationship of a subject to the greater picture of America. Because I think if you could define the mission of our series in any way, it's to try to form a picture of this great experiment that began in 1776 called America, and try to understand what it is. And it's an evolving, dynamic picture. And for each one of our films, we try to add one more little puzzle piece to that picture. And Walt Disney adds a big puzzle piece to it. He helps form sort of the ethos, one idea of an ethos that formulates our idea of not only art and entertainment, but how we think about the world. And I think that, the 1930s was a really acutely difficult time, and yet it was the time when Walt Disney thrived. And he thrived in part because he came out at the right time with this innovative new creature and this new entity of cartoons built around Mickey Mouse. He also thrived at a time because he had this merchandise which spoke to hope and grit and determination and all those things that Americans were looking for in those hard times. And so his timing was impeccable, I think, with Mickey Mouse.
And I think too, Walt, he broke so many rules, not in a rebellious kind of way, but an innovative kind of way. When he was frustrated by the limits of technology, he just went out and invented it himself. How do you think Walt's sort of unique style of tackling problems and changing the way we viewed family entertainment led to his immense popularity, not just with children, but with so many adults as well?
I mean, one of the things that I think this is a good opportunity to remind folks, and when you see the film, you'll understand this better for those of you who don't know the story, is there was also behind him his brother Roy. And so for every sort of creative genius and for every innovator, there needs to be somebody who's sort of minding the store and holding the checkbook and trying to keep things running. And that was very much the role of Roy, and I think Walt was lucky that he had Roy to play that role. And another issue that I think comes up in the Walt Disney story is he was an artist, but as the company grew, he was sort of taken further and further away from that process. And I think he was always looking for ways to go back to that. And I think that Roy enabled him to do that. And then again, as I said earlier, his sort of the restless, okay, what can I do next? I think all played into that.
Yeah, and it was a great balance that he had with his brother, and he surrounded himself by the people who were the very best at what they did. During one of the clips that we got to see, we got a little peek into some of the tougher times with the studio beginning to talk about union organization. And it seemed like Walt was sort of unfazed, because he was maybe so disconnected from this employee base that was growing so very rapidly. He couldn't, he used to say that he was a bumblebee. He would go to flower, but he couldn't be the bumblebee and touch every single person. Was he really unfazed by what was going on? And when he finally did realize it, or when it was brought to his attention, what did they start to do to resolve some of these employee complaints?
Well, Lou, actually, I wouldn't say that he was unfazed. I would say that he was befuddled by it. Walt Disney was able to create stories that were universal and still are universal. I mean, that's why you have every nationality on the planet showing up to Disney World and Disneyland, because his stories are touching deep, deep, deep universal. If he were to do his own story, he would find a universal in the story. And the universal is that his success came around to distance him from the thing that he loved most, which was touching the art that he was making, immersing himself in the storytelling and the cell construction and the music and the dancing and all that. He was fully up to his elbows in those great films from the 1930s and early 1940s. And yet the company's success grew and grew and grew until, as you saw, he was a man up in the office with the bank of secretaries in front. And he'd lost touch with that, and he'd lost that spark. To be honest with you, the way the story unfolds in Sarah's film, he loses that spark for a period of time, and it's really only when he leaves the Disney studio, forms WED, and starts to dream about this theme park called Disneyland, that he regains that kind of immersive, tactile sense of working on his passion, and it revitalizes him.
I want to actually touch on the theme parks, but just you talked about his, universal this and universal that. Just FYI, Mark, when you're down in Central Florida talking to Disney fans, you don't say the U word at all in conversation.
Okay, what's a synonym for known around the world?
Global.
Global. Human. How about human?
Human.
Is there a human theme park here?
Yes.
So he is speaking about, again, this radical idea of immersing his audience and guests in a 3D environment where they're no longer sort of passive observers, but they are active participants in it. He took a lot of inspiration from his travels and from his personal experiences, and it also sort of goes back again to his childhood growing up in small town Missouri. How important do you think growing up in that sort of very simple Midwestern roots were to his career? And do you think that the parks were his attempt, especially Main Street USA, to sort of recreate that as an adult?
Okay. Well, he wants me to answer because I'm from the Midwest. Anybody here from Marceline or from Missouri? Is anybody here from Missouri? All right. Welcome. I'm sure most of you know that Walt Disney spent 4 years in a small town in Missouri, Marceline, and it was a real touchstone for his whole life. He lived on a farm, and things were relatively calm. Home wasn't always calm for Walt. He had a pretty stern father, pretty difficult. His father struggled actually to make a living most of the time. But this moment is a sort of a peaceful, serene moment in the countryside with the animals and the farm and everything. And if you look at a lot of the things that he created, you find a character in a way searching to find that moment, to find that peace. I would say the two things that the film really, I think, the themes that it draws out strongly are that, like Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney considered himself a little bit of an outsider. He was never really at the center of the Hollywood thing that he became a part of. It's hard to imagine how Walt Disney couldn't be at the epicenter of Hollywood power, but he never was. He never got that Best Feature Film Oscar, which he so deserved. And he never got that kind of respect. Mary Poppins gave him a little bit of respect at the end, but that's pretty late. In addition to feeling like an outsider, he really strongly felt that there was a place out there that if you were struggling, if you were an underdog, and if you were, had some odds against you, if you stuck to what you really were passionate about and really believed in, you could find your way back to that light. And that light for him was in many ways represented by those moments in Marceline.
I'm sure the documentary is going to touch on, the unfortunately early and tragic end to Walt's life. Can you tell us a little bit about Walt at that time? How did he look at his place in pop culture, about his accomplishments, his regrets, and did he maybe feel like he paid a huge personal price for creating, the empire that he did?
I mean, I'm not sure it's that as much as, in his hospital room, as he was dying, he was still saying to Roy, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And certainly, relatively late in his career, breaking off and starting WDW, I think all of those things spoke to he was not finished. He was absolutely not finished. And I think, Mark talked about the Mary Poppins, and I think Mary Poppins for him was the nomination, but I think he probably would have liked to win the prize.
Yeah. We saw the little clip of, all the animals and the dwarves surrounding Snow White when she's dying. Walt Disney, who created this, this cast of thousands and this empire, the final moments, it's Roy and Walt, the two brothers, kid brothers, dying. And Walt's pointing up at a picture of Epcot and telling Roy what needs to be done because he's got to carry on. He's got to do it. It's a really moving moment.
Yeah, people speculate all the time. What would Walt think of Epcot, and why didn't they? And so many people that I've talked to, I'm sure you did too, when Walt passed and they had this vision of what Epcot was supposed to be, they didn't have everything else that was, and they sort of looked at each other and said, well, what do we do? Because we don't have our leader. He didn't explain to us how to actually go about executing on this vision.
Very true. I mean, I don't want to give away the ending of the movie, but I will say at the end, as much as he had of iWorks and all these incredible artists and thousands of really talented people that worked for him, at the end, what you hear is one by one people come out and say, when they heard the news, it just felt like something had been sucked out of life. And, and I think something major, vision, there just wasn't anybody to step into those shoes. Never could be.
In the last clip, which made me cry because I cry every time I hear Let's Go Fly a Kite, we saw Mary Poppins, which is my favorite movie. A lot of us who live here in Central Florida know that a lot of what we have here in terms of Walt Disney World was funded by the profits from that film. We also know, thanks to stories and Saving Mr. Banks, that it was not the easiest movie in the world to make for many reasons. But aside from the stories that maybe we saw in that film, which obviously was not a documentary type film, what can you share with us about Walt's direct involvement in terms of the making of Mary Poppins and getting that film finally made?
I mean, I think it was going back to Walt as a dad. I do think at its core it was about fulfilling a promise he had made to his two young daughters. So I think from that perspective, and I think, the clip, and Carmenita sort of eloquently says it was definitely for him, to present that family in that way. And I think that was really important to him. I think that what's interesting about that sort of moment in his career is Walt always looked at one project as a way to pay for the next project. So I think, as you say, Mary Poppins, the success of that film allowed him to put more money into the theme parks and into the idea of Epcot. So that was always the way he worked, and it was always Roy who was saying, like, okay, we've done Snow White, can we take a break? No, now we're going to do Bambi. And I think that those projects always did that, and I think Mary Poppins was that project for him at that point.
And I'm happy you mentioned the personal connection to his family. My favorite Walt quote is that a man should never neglect his family for business. And I'm sure the film will show, as busy as Walt was running the studio and dealing with all these different issues, he drove his daughters to school, and Saturday was Daddy's Day, and that's one of the things that I love and admire about him. But you, as the filmmakers, what did you learn, or what was sort of that aha moment or thing that you found surprising or interesting about Walt while making the film itself?
Well, I will say, Lou, first that there is that moment with Walt and his family, and the footage that Sarah and her team were able to get out and really bring to light for the first time is really stunning. Like, just to give a shout out to her and her team. That footage of Walt at that party that we saw in that clip, that was from the attic of Art Babbitt, and there's material like that has been seldom or never seen before, and so you do get a sense of Walt, the family man, with his kids, and he's in the pool, and he's on the train and stuff like that, and that's really comes through. And it's one thing to sort of say he was that, and it's another thing to sort of see it and see them the sparkle in their eyes towards them. I would say that the most surprising thing that I learned, and I learned a lot, I didn't know that much about him, as I said beforehand, is, I didn't realize how strong his passion was for taking a step beyond the conventional and the known, that he was never satisfied with just doing something well that had been done. It had to be that one extra step, the one extra thing that could be added that would maybe push us into new ground. So you got to bring in the three-dimensional camera that we've all seen pictures of that towers up, and you got to have these multi-plane cameras and be able to move through it, because you got to make it feel like it's real. And you've got to get that dancing just right. So we're going to bring in the ballerina. She's going to dance for the animators. They're going to get it just right. Because it's not just going to be a sketch and just be approximate. It's going to be actually how they twirled and moved and how the facial expressions were going to be. And they had to be real. And, now we have all these technological tools, and we can put, equipment on people and get their animation moves just right and get it easy, and technology is kind of taking place with that. It was really Walt's drive to get that done that made it happen in those films.
I want to bring it back to Central Florida. Obviously, we're talking about, at his passing, his unrealized dream was not just Epcot, but his Florida project. Again, his brother comes out of sort of semi-retirement to fulfill his vision and to name it Walt Disney World. We know he didn't spend a lot of time here. We have seen some clips here and there of Walt sort of walking the property very early on. But can you tell us, or maybe share with us, anything that you found in your research about his direct involvement or presence here in Central Florida?
I mean, I think one of the challenges for the film is that it is a biography, and so it has the end date, if you will. And I think that ending in 1966, Florida was just beginning. He had bought some land down here. He had done those things, but I think there isn't a lot that I learned in that sort of what would have come next, other than that on his hospital bed he was telling Roy what needed to happen.
Yeah, there's a nice clip in the film with the press conference with Walt and the governor of Florida, and the governor is pressing him for, now, when you're going to open it, and what's it going to be, and how big is it going to be, and what's it going to do here, and what's that? And Walt's like, well, we're working on that.
We'll let you know when we figure it out.
We'll get back to you on that.
Excellent. I'd love to make sure we have some time for questions from the audience. I know that we have a microphone coming around. I think there's somebody out in the back.
Way in the back.
Left corner.
This has really been an honor, and Lou, great job moderating as always. I'm curious, Walt Disney, the businessman, it was not uncommon for business people in that era who had their name on the company to be authoritarian, to be benign dictators at the time. Can you talk about the company culture from a business standpoint that you uncovered?
A good deal of the film deals with that, and because he was not only a cultural figure, but he was actually a financial and business figure as well, and that's what drew us to the story. You know, I don't know if that's his strength, really, to be honest with you. I think that comes through, and everybody talks about it. He saw what he had created as a family. He called his animators his boys, and you know, at the time, across the industry, there was a really low glass ceiling for women, and he wasn't, you know, alone in keeping women down to a certain level, even though later he'll be blamed for that. And you know, when it was just a handful of people and they were creating the early stuff, you know, he probably did feel like a family. It probably did run, but he also just, you know, ran the finances into the ground. And Roy had to constantly go up to San Francisco and get more and more money from Bank of America. And they got further and further into debt. And he said, now this time they've given us a loan, and we got to deliver the product to the distributor, and we got to get the payment, we got to pay them back by December. And December would come and go, and then March would come and go, and he'd still be working on the thing and making it better and better. So in many ways, I think you got to give Roy credit for holding this thing together until it gelled. And it doesn't really gel financially for a long, long time. I mean, you know, Mickey Mouse is paying off the debts for all the things that didn't work. And then Snow White is paying off all the debts for the stuff that didn't work between Mickey and Snow White. And it's not really until the sum of the end revenues are coming in from Snow White that they're able to breathe.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the point of Walt being the dreamer and Roy being the doer.
Exactly.
You know, throughout their entire relationship. So, and I think it's gonna be interesting to watch. You know, we talk about Walt in business. You know, Walt as a leader, Walt as a boss. I think we're going to glean some very interesting lessons from him. But we're also going to see that, you know, Walt was probably not the easiest guy to work for, but he knew just how to pull the very best from the people that worked for him.
You know, we heard Richard Sherman at the top of the film say, you know, you'd say, I have a great idea, and Walt would say, you have an idea, I'll tell you if it's a great idea. And I think that says a lot.
And that's coming from a guy who we were fortunate to spend a fair amount of time with the last couple of months. He's just great, 87-year-old kid. And, you know, and he considered Walt really his father, his surrogate father, and his brother. And,
I mean, when he and his brother came into the company, Walt, you know, was absolutely treated them like his sons.
Yeah, and he was tough. He was tough.
But you see the reverence and the respect they have for him as well.
And I think what comes out in a lot of the people who work for Walt is that they wanted to please him, and they knew that his quest for perfectionism was only making it all better.
And you couldn't say no. You maybe said no once, and you never said no again.
Because he was right so often. That's the problem. Terrible to have a boss who's right all the time.
Got one more, Lou.
Thank you.
When you have lived in Central Florida for 30 years, every time the ticket prices went up, more went for parking, whatever the case may be, you would hear people say, oh, Walt would be rolling over in his grave. How untrue is that? Or how true is that?
Is that a question for me?
I was just going to say, yeah.
Well, you can't research speculation, so I'm not going to speculate on what Walt would roll over in his grave about. I'm sorry, I don't know, honestly. I mean, what he would think. I think, you know, he would, you know, it wasn't. I don't know. The stuff was expensive when he was.
You know what? I would. You know what I would tell you? I would tell you to go into Magic Kingdom and look at the partner statue, where he's standing there with Mickey and he's holding his hand out. And people have speculated for years. You know, what is he pointing to? Is he pointing to Epcot? Is he pointing to the future? And what he's saying to Mickey is, look at how happy all these people are. And I think that's what he would look to. Is see not the prices and the things, and he hopefully Walt wouldn't pay attention to Twitter. But actually, he probably would pay attention to Twitter. But hopefully, it would be the same thing.
Unless it's from this event.
Right. Hopefully, he'd see tens of millions of happy guests, and people
He
walking
was so transmedia. I mean, my God, he was into everything. You know, he was getting television to pay for a theme park, and he was getting the merchandise to pay for the films. I think he'd be all over social media. I think
he'd be taking selfies in Disneyland left and right. So,
just a question: the Disney social network's pretty broad, and we'll be talking with our friends and family about this film. Is this going to be broadcast on PBS nationwide on the 14th and 15th?
Yes, so it's broadcast nationwide on PBS September 14th and 15th. And then on the Wednesday, which is the 16th, the 4 hours will be streaming online for a limited time as well.
Yeah, we're in 98% of American households. This is everywhere.
Hi. You mentioned access to a lot of material from the Walt Disney Company. Were there any specific executives or people within the Walt Disney Company that were, I'm curious at how high a level and who was kind of responsible at making those kind of decisions, because I got to believe that's got to go to the top.
Sure. So let me just, this is a good opportunity to acknowledge one of the people in the project, Becky Klein, who is in charge of the Disney Archive, was really incredibly helpful, her and her team. And in many ways, Sarah and her team were going into the archives, and there were things that hadn't been released, and there wasn't mechanisms in place. And so Becky and her team really worked really hard to make sure that Sarah had that access and could get all of those materials out of the archives and to be able to use them. I will, in answering the other part of your question, quote Becky herself, who I think when Mark first, had the meetings at Disney Corporate to get this permission, I can't for sure say how high up, the chain it went, but Becky at D23 a few weeks ago said that, what she told folks is, she looked at the track record of American Experience and of PBS and said to everyone, in the company all the way up to Bob Iger that, this were people who we should trust. So I feel like from that perspective, it was a company-wide decision, but I don't know that we could, I wouldn't necessarily quote Iger at this point.
It had to be pretty high because even though they're the biggest entertainment corporation in the world and they have, all the resources you can imagine that they have, they had never gotten stuff out to give to somebody. It's like if someone asking you, you've never really shared your attic with anybody, and you got to go up and go, now where is that box, and what am I going to do with that? And I know where it is, but I've never even gotten it, cracked it open and gotten it out. It's not like this stuff has never, ever been used before, but they didn't have a mechanism to service an external entity like us who had a pretty voracious appetite for photographs and motion pictures and line drawings and things like that. You could feel that they were doing this for the first time. These were not muscles that they had used before.
I mean, one of the things that we heard in the process is, for Sleeping Beauty, there were something like 18 three-ring binders of story notes because Walt had every story meeting transcribed and put into notes that he could refer back to. So that, that's one film in a, volume of films. So there's a tremendous amount of material that goes through.
And the other interesting thing that we dealt with over the last couple of years, you probably remember exactly the films, I don't, but every now and again we'd say, we'd hear from them, well, we can't really help you with all those requests right now because we were opening whatever film is coming up, Frozen or something like that, and it'd be like, the whole company kind of gets directed towards this thing, and it's like, we're still going.
We still need to do it right.
But I love the fact that next Monday, everybody at the Disney company, including Bob Iger, is going to be sitting on the couch in their pajamas watching PBS. When you're watching next week, they're like, you know what? Bob Iger's sitting back watching the exact same thing at the exact same time because he hasn't seen it yet either.
Hey, how you doing? Just a quick question. What didn't you have access to? Did you have any kind of anything that blocked anything that you really wanted to take a look at? Was there anything that they said, no, we don't really want you to look at it?
No.
No, and I think the other thing, in addition to the Disney company, the Disney Family Museum, we have the same situation with them in terms of getting access to their materials. So there are other, everything you see on screen doesn't necessarily belong to the Disney company, but there wasn't anything that they said, oh no, we don't want you to look in that box.
I don't think we would have gotten into an agreement with them if they would have walled off some stuff at the beginning. We were after the whole story.
It's been interesting lately that so much more stuff has been coming out about Walt Disney, and we just recently saw him for the first time on screen in Saving Mr. Banks. Do you personally, either of you, feel like there's a reason for that, or did you discover anything of like there's new information coming out that hasn't been previously released, and is like what is America's draw to learn more about Walt Disney like at this time?
I think that's a great question. I honestly don't know if there's a renewed interest in him at this moment. It feels a little bit more coincidental that Saving Mr. Banks came out and now our biography of him is coming out. I think maybe within the corporation that the experience of allowing a fictional account of Walt Disney and to have him be played by an actor and the sky didn't fall maybe helped things a little bit. But to be honest with you, we were already in production when Saving Mr. Banks came out, so I can't really say that it was cause and effect. But I don't know. I mean, maybe you can tell me that his interest in Walt Disney has waxed and waned over the year, but he seems pretty front and center to me all the time.
I mean, again, we were also in production when it happened, but when Steve Jobs died, I think a lot of people were trying to figure out who was Steve Jobs like. But again, we were already in production, Saving Mr. Banks was already in production, but I think there are, to your question, a handful of people who sort of merit this constant looking at, and I think Walt Disney is for sure one of them.
Well, I think too, one thing that excites me about the film is not just learning about Walt the person, but looking at it from a business perspective, and I think with this incredible sense of entrepreneurship that's going on. I mean, Walt was the consummate entrepreneur. He was making things happen, and I think I'm interested to look and learn from it from a business perspective too, because one of the things that caught me was we think, of Walt as obviously somebody who believed in, wholeheartedly in what he did. He mortgaged everything he had on it. But I found it interesting when he was talking about Snow White, when he was describing it to the NBC reporter, he says, I hope that people aren't too disappointed. He looked at it as like, they're going to be disappointed. I hope they're not too disappointed, as opposed to, I think this is going to be a smashing success.
Well, I hope people aren't too disappointed.
It worked for Walt, though.
Hello?
Oh, hello. You're live.
I'm going to stand up. Okay. I just was wondering, what kind of response do you think this is going to have? I mean, I am a big Walt Disney fan, and seeing it, some parts, maybe some people will be uncomfortable, especially after seeing Saving Mr. Banks, and maybe a more polished or sugar-coated, I guess, view of Walt, especially since it came out from the Disney company. Maybe not having him smoke, not showing a side of him where he was maybe unhappy with things or frustrated. Do you think it will be hard for some Disney fans to watch it or show a different side?
That's a great question, and we've been anticipating this, and Jim, you should weigh in on this too. Yeah, I do. I think that, we've already experienced, and Jim has experienced firsthand just very recently, the passionate adoration that there is for Walt Disney. Quite justified in many ways, but it's an adoration that may, not have a high degree of tolerance for seeing his human faults, his human side. And I think there's going to be that. And I think there's also going to be the feeling that, we didn't drive the nail into him. There's so many swirling things. Walt was a Nazi supporter, and Walt was a woman hater, and Walt was a this, and Walt was a that. These kind of, these myths that have risen up around him, and why didn't you deal with that? And so I think the people that really, don't love Walt Disney and don't love his view of life are also going to come out. But hopefully, the vast number of the millions of people that are going to see this are going to not have such extreme views towards Walt and find something new, something fresh. And, if they love Walt Disney, that love will be reinforced and renewed. And if they're skeptical about Walt Disney, maybe they'll still retain some of that skepticism, because he's a dominating, powerful figure in our psyche and in our culture.
I think the strength of the film is that we do bring together a lot of voices and a lot of things that people know and don't know. And I think for us as a series, our track record, again, as Mark said, the presidential biographies and things like that, you are never going to please everybody. And so I think our goal here is to, illuminate the subject and not necessarily try to fit into one camp or another. In fact, if we do fit into a camp, I think we've failed.
Yeah, it's no other company, I think, has the brand loyalty. And clearly, I think we all have such an emotional connection, not just to the brand, but to the person. So my advice on Monday is to stay off Twitter. Just ignore it completely, because don't watch the live tweeting as it's going on. So, but I think that you have a lot of Disney enthusiasts who are just excited. I know me personally as a fan, this is sort of what we've been waiting for a long, long time. So, anybody else have any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
After the film was completed, after all your research, what's the one thing that you guys thought were amazing about the man Walt Disney that blew you away? Prior.
I'm going to answer first. It was his brother Roy.
Roy was amazing. What was
when you look at Disney from a distance, and it's how did he do it? How did he do it? And I think for me, as the story took shape, to see the role that Roy played, Roy was a reason why Walt was able to do what he did, and I certainly did not know that before this project.
I like the early Walt. I like the Walt who's risked everything in Kansas City and nothing really gelled. He made some advances in animation and did Laugh-O-Gram and some cool stuff there, but it basically all collapses at his feet. And he gets on a train with nothing to go out to California, because that's where his brother, who's got tuberculosis, has had to go. And, he shows up here in California, like so many people still do show up in California, with a dream and a hope. And he just never gives in to defeat, never gives in to sour grapes, never gives in to not having privilege and not having money and not having the ease. Just keeps fighting. So when you look at the characters, the memorable characters, you see that fight, you see that grit and determination.
It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where I invite you to test your knowledge of Walt Disney World history, or see how well you pay attention to the details, not just in what you see, but sometimes in what you hear. If you think you know the answer, you can enter by email for a chance to win a Disney Prize package. Before we get to this week's question, let's go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week's question really wasn't about the history or details or extinct attractions, but really one of Walt Disney World's newer attractions, which is Belle's Enchanted Tales in New Fantasyland. And your question was simply to tell me, what gift do participants who get to take place in the attraction and show received as a gift at the end of the show? And as always, thanks to the hundreds of you that entered and got this one correct, because whether you have won the bookmark or not, you knew that that is what you receive, appropriately enough, from Belle at the end of the show. I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one, and this week's winner is going to get a WDW Radio Magic Band cover and a copy of my 102 Ways to Save Money For and at Walt Disney World book. And last week's winner is Bonnie Sandhorn. So Bonnie, congratulations. I'll contact you, get your package out to you right away. If you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So we're talking about Walt again this week, and really excited for the PBS documentary airing for the first time next week. And obviously, Walt Disney World is the ultimate realization of Walt's dream, although he never saw it completed. And as you know, the windows on Main Street USA honor those who played a very important role in the creation of Walt Disney World, as well as other contributions to the company as a whole. And while most people, pretty much almost everybody, only has one window, Walt has more. So your question this week is to tell me, how many locations can you find Walt Disney's name on Main Street USA? Now, to be clear, let's assume that Main Street USA in Walt Disney World begins from where you enter the turnstiles into where you reach the hub. So Main Street USA, for the purposes of this question, here's the recovering attorney in me coming out, is everywhere from the turnstiles all the way to the hub. So tell me, how many locations can you find Walt's name on a window, right, on a pane of glass on Main Street USA? This should be interesting. You have until Sunday, September 13th at 11:59 p.m. to email your answer to contest@wdwradio.com. Again, you're playing for the 102 ways to save money for an at Walt Disney World book and a very snazzy WDW Radio Magic Band cover. So good luck and have fun. That is going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this and every week. Want to start off by saying thank you again to some new members of the WDW Radio Nation, including Michael Milne, Elizabeth LaRiviere, Linda Raymond, and Amy and Robert. If you want to help the show and get some cool exclusive rewards every month, including new scavenger hunts that you can take with you to the parks or play at home, you also get access to our private Facebook group. Lots of great conversations going on there. You get custom personalized WDW Radio Nation Magic Band covers. There's also backpacks, t-shirts, monthly care packages from the parks. We do exclusive live video group calls and lots more. For more information, visit wdwradio.com/support. Again, completely optional, but a great way for you to help the show. And don't forget that a portion of the proceeds will go to benefit the Dream Team project through the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. Please also join me every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live. It's a live video broadcast and chat where you can be in the chat room, chat about this week's Walt Disney World news, and then I stay on for about an hour or so. You can ask me anything. Really sort of a great way just to have some fun conversation. Again, that's Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, but at wdwradiolive.com, or you can watch on your mobile device via the free Ustream app or Periscope. I'm at Lou Mongello there. Speaking of at Lou Mongello, I am at Lou Mongello on all the social. Would love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, whatever it may be. If you have a question you want answered on the show, you can email me, lou@wdwradio.com, or call the voicemail, 407-900-9391, with a question, a comment, a hello from the parks. I'll play it at the end of the show. And if you have listened to the show before, you know, there's as much as I love chatting with you online and through the show and social media and everything else, I think that nothing beats a handshake and the hug, and that is why I love doing live events, including our monthly Meet of the Month in Walt Disney World. The next one is going to be on September 20th outside the parks in downtown Disney/Disney Springs. If you know me, if you've met me, you know that I love my food at Walt Disney World. So let's combine the Meet of the Month with the MEAT, Meet of the Month, and meet over at the Food Truck Park in Disney Springs from 4 to 6 p.m. Again, that is Sunday, September 20th. You can visit the events page at www.radio.com for more information about that. RSVP over on the Facebook page. Let us know that you're coming. Anyone and everyone is invited and welcome. Come alone, bring the family, come late, stay early, strike that, reverse it. You know what I mean? We would love to see you there. Also, don't forget about things like our Star Wars cruise on the Disney Fantasy, February 6th through the 13th. It's our 9th anniversary, Star Wars Day at Sea. It's the Super Bowl, lots of other cool stuff going on there. Our meetup in New Orleans, Chicago the week of July 8th, the e-ticket adventure in November 2016, and lots more. Also, don't forget that we'll be there for the Walt Disney World Marathon, as well as all the different marathon events. We'd love to have you be part of the running team and or take part in our Tomorrowland virtual race in October. You don't need to be a member of the team or run a real race. You can do it at home or at work. Everybody gets a very, very cool medal as well. You can find out more about the events at the events page, and also visit wdwradio.com/VR, like virtual race, VR15, in order to take part in the virtual race and run. I'll also be doing other meetups, not in Walt Disney World. I'm traveling a lot in the next few months for speaking and conferences and things like that. You can visit LouMongello.com for more information and to find out how to book me to speak at your conference, with your business, or to your school, or how I can work with you one-on-one or small mastermind groups and maybe help you turn your passion into your profession and do the thing that you love and build your brand and business. Thanks as always to mousefantravel.com. Whether you're going to world, land, any Disney destination really on the planet, you can visit them for a free, no obligation quote and incredible levels of personal service. And go to celebrationspress.com to get Celebrations magazine delivered to your door or your device. And as always, my friends, and you are my friends, whether we have met yet or not, all I ask is that if you like the show, please help spread the word. Let others know about it. Tweet out that you're listening, right? Share links and come by and comment over on the Facebook page at facebook.com/WDW Radio. And please come by, take a minute, review the show over on iTunes. Thanks to you, we have more than 1,000 5-star reviews. Would love to keep more coming. Thanks to Ska Connor and Madman1502 for their recent 5-star reviews. Search for WDW Radio in the iTunes store or just visit wdwradio.com/iTunes for a link and instructions on how to do it. And finally, and most importantly, my sincerest thanks to you for taking the time to tune in, for the friendship, for the support, for allowing me to share my love for Disney with you through the show and the books and the tweets and the meets and everything else in between. And because of you, I owe so much, because I am leading such a very happy life. And I want you to do the same, right? I think you need to realize that you need to find happiness every day and not at the end of the road, right? It should be happiness should really be a way of life and not something that you aspire to eventually get to, because once you're there, the journey's over. So find a little bit of happiness every single day in yourself and maybe by helping others. And if I could ever help you, please let me know how I can say thank you to you. I hope that you have the best week ever, and that it only pales in comparison to the week that will follow. Thank you again so very much. Have an amazing week this week. So until next time, see ya.
Hey, Lou, this is Drew coming all the way from sunny Dallas, Texas. I just got done listening to the podcast and want to talk about your favorite books from Disney. And I was very thankful that you actually did mention the very first book I ever read about Disney, which was How to Be Like Walt. At the time, my fiance had been showing me around the different parts in Disney World and Disneyland. There were some TV specials showing all the different parks, and man, I'm kind of blank here. The parks, the cruise ships, everything about Disney on a week-long thing that were showing the different parks, and I fell in love more and more with the Disney concept and stuff like that, and watched the movies for God knows how long. And when you mentioned that book, it brought back some really good times to figure out, hey, the innovation that this man created into what is now not just pop culture, but just everyday life nowadays here in the world we live in. It's pretty crazy. I just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing your podcast to everyone. It's a great way to listen and learn more about what I love the most, or at least one of the things I love the most, if I'm not singing Disney covers to my little baby nephew. So anyway, Lou, thank you so much. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Hello, Lou Mongello, Darlene Yankee from West Seneca, New York. I have to say, I loved the episode of 416, the D23 Expo review. That you, I think, touched every single thing that I loved. I think my most favorite spot of the D23 Expo, which I was not there, was for the announcement of all the upcoming movies and the upcoming 2 new lands at Hollywood Studios. I'm just absolutely so pumped up for 2020, 2021, whenever they open. Definitely coming down then to see those. Not that I'm not going down twice next year. One for the 5K in January, which we are now 127 days away for, and then you guys all, the WDW radio group, has 159 days for the Star Wars cruise with Darth Vader. Woo! Perfect. After all the Star Wars land announcements. And then We have the e-ticket adventure from New York City to St. Martin and leading off in Puerto Rico in 430 days. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a fantastic upcoming year. Have a great day, everyone. Hugs.
You've got a friend in me. Yeah.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.
Well, it sounds pretty good. In fact, that's just the right spirit.